This is Stare Down the Bull. I'm your host, Susan Hunt. Around here, we tackle the hard stuff, how to lead with clarity, leveraging AI, and turn strategy into real results. My guest today brings a powerful perspective on how to do exactly that. Let's dive in. On this episode of Stare Down the Bull, we sit down with Mike Phillips, a true pioneer who helped turn speech recognition from an academic experience into a global industry. Long before voice tech was a category, Mike was deep in the MIT speech labs, asking questions no one else was asking, and then doing something rare, taking those ideas out of the lab and into the real world. As founder and CTO of SpeechWorks and later Vlingo, Mike didn't just build technology. He built companies, sold to competitors who thought they could build it themselves, and helped define how speech would scale across telecom, enterprise, and consumer markets. Along the way, he learned what it means to move from scientist to operator, from inventor to leader, and from builder to letting go. This conversation is about the hard leaps, productizing research, selling to world-class engineers, standing in front of customers instead of whiteboards, and walking away from a company you poured your life into. We also talk about Sense, the company that Mike built next, and the moment when staring down the bull was the only option. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you?
It's great to be here. Thanks a lot.
So let's start back at MIT. You were early in the speech labs. I mean, like really early in the speech labs at MIT before speech recognition was even a category, a thing, really. What problems were you actually trying to solve back then?
So I was involved at MIT and actually Carnegie Mellon before that, where we were funded by DARPA. DARPA had put a lot of work into speech recognition over actually decades. And there was kind of a new round of technology that came about in the 1980s. Then in the 1994 is when I decided to leave MIT and start SpeechWorks.
So what were you trying to solve when you were doing the research back there?
Yeah, look, I mean, this was basically a typical research-driven framework. There was a lot of different research labs working on kind of core technology for speech recognition. Back then, it was mainly what were called hidden Markov models or statistical models. And it became pretty clear to me in, like, say, 1994, that this technology was getting good enough that it could be commercially viable. So went and started a company to see how we could make it available in the market.
So you were one of the first, very earliest researchers to think that you could just take the technology and productize it. So tell me a little bit about that leap and what the moment was that you knew, you shouldn't stay in the labs and you should go and create this company, and what the founding thesis was for doing that.
Yeah, and in fact, there had been a couple rounds of companies and technology around speech recognition. There were some very early technologies, even back in the 1970s. It was called template matching, where it could just store little pictures of a couple
Oh,
of different words. It just didn't have a lot of applications. The work being done in these DARPA-funded research was the first what we called large vocabulary speech recognition back then. Um, yeah, in the 1990s, that's when it got to a point where it seemed like it would be possible to build products around that. Um, so myself and a few others from started SpeechWorks back in 1994, and we were kind of broadly looking at where would we apply it, and the place that seemed most clear was in the call center industry, because at the time, most call center applications were press or say one. you dial up
right,
these
right.
and
They were
press or say
annoying.
one. Remember, Susan, we worked together on these things, and we
Yes.
realized you should just still say what you want instead of having to press or say one. So that was the very first market where this became commercially viable in a big enough way to support a company like SpeechWorks.
Are you surprised at how much it's blown up over the last couple of years and how it's kind of perceived as being brand new, and really it's been like a 30-year project that people like you have been working on? Because I'm a little surprised at the change in AI over the last 2 years, given how slow it really was all along.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's been various step functions that have happened, at least from a perception standpoint. There's been continuous improvement throughout the years,
Yes,
just like there's a Moore's
true.
law of computing. There's been a similar kind of every year these things get better and better, and it gets perceived as kind of step functions based on market activity. So there was these early call center systems that we worked on together, Susan. Uh, then the place where it became mainstream in a consumer way first, and this is what I did after leaving Nuance back in 2005, was in the mobile phone world. This is where mobile phones were just flip phones and Blackberries back in 2005, and it became clear that they were getting connected to data networks. They would become people's personal information, entertainment, communication device. That's the words we use there because we didn't have the word
Yeah.
smartphone, and that you should just talk to those instead of um, typing at them. And so we started Lingo back in 2005, and we made a lot of progress in the market. But then when Google came out with their Google Voice Search, and then especially when Apple bought this little company called Siri, and then made that quite popular, that's when there was a big step function in perception
Yes.
around these back in. So that was 2008, I think, is when Siri became popularized. And then you mentioned now, I mean, there's been amazing advances in AI technology in general. Kind of early days was driving speech recognition, and now these large language models are driving so many different things, and it really has. It's pretty amazing, both the technology leap and now the market perception around that.
Yeah, if you listen to Stare Down the Bull at all, I have a number of kind of young entrepreneurs, founders that are doing different things with AI, and the amount of different things that they are using AI for, different products, different ways of researching, different ways of coding, it feels endless to me. I mean, it literally feels endless to me at this point, which wasn't the case. Like, if you recall, back in the day when I was pretending that you were my sales engineer and dragging you all over the country, because you and I worked on really important customers, actually. We worked on telco. So not only did we work on telco together, not only did I drag you all over the country, and we had some real laughs actually during that time. Um, we also were selling to companies that had their own speech labs, who actually felt that they had the best speech, and we were winning. And these weren't small companies. This was Verizon, this was AT&T, and we were competing with internal companies. To this day, I have people ask me, how in the world did you do that? Like, how did you actually end up with the contracts when they had these entire speech organizations within their own companies? And I'm always kind of hard pressed to answer the question. I remember it being a lot of work and a lot of conversations, a lot of negotiation. And then the bottom line is it came down to, we were commercially ready and they were nowhere near commercially ready, even if they had really good tech. So tell me what your thoughts were about doing that kind of work with me and running around the country selling to telcos. And it made a big difference in the business, I think, overall, that we sold some of those really big companies in the end.
Yeah, so first of all, it was great fun to work with you, Susan. We did
Yeah,
have
it was
a
fun.
good time doing that. It was pretty hilarious at times. But yeah, I think the overall point that you're making, and I still see true to this day, is that startups or companies focused on a particular market can just make progress that these larger organizations cannot. Especially, some of these things that we're talking about here, Susan, were like kind of the taking a very hard technology, taking kind of a market direction, and then taking a complicated deployment path, and pulling all that together is the key to having successful products. And doing that in larger organizations, just for whatever reason, tends to be difficult. Whereas you have this is the role of startups, is to create markets based on those intersections. And again, I see that even happening today, that provides real value to create innovation through this combination of technology and product direction. Now, when things get to a certain maturity where it becomes the case that you just need vast resources to go in and develop them, that's when it then becomes the more natural fit for much larger companies.
Yeah. I mean, I even see some of these things today where people are coming out of wherever, Stanford, MIT, and they're starting companies. And They're starting speech companies, and I ask what the value prop is because I'm literally perplexed by what is the value prop of starting a new speech company or a new whatever company. And their answer often, unfortunately, is, well, we're just the best. And I'm like, look, no big company is going to unplug years of speech recognition for one percentage. So you have to have something a lot more than we are the best. And, the chances that they're the best is probably really slim to none anyways. But I kind of caution people coming out of school and thinking that that is going to be the thing that solves the problem, because once these companies have this stuff ingrained in their systems, their networks, they don't even know where half of it is half the time. So it's just not like, oh, I'm going to just unplug 20 years of nuance and plug this other thing in because it's one more point of whatever. That's just not going to happen. So I see, unfortunately, a little too much of that, and I'm surprised people are investing in companies like that because it doesn't make any sense to me. But when you left, so eventually we bought Nuance, which was really fun because they were just this giant competitor of ours, and quite frankly, a complete pain in the ass all the time because they were the classic. I always describe the East Coast, West Coast beef between SpeechWorks and Nuance, and the way that we were different in one really significant way. And we both thought that we were right at the time. And in a way, we both were right. SpeechWorks understood clearly that there was a lot to deploying this stuff and that you needed a world-class services organization to deploy it in these giant companies. That made us seem a little bit slow and stodgy, but we also were very reliable. Like, I remember as a salesperson, I've never been able to say this again. Once it got to the service group, I knew everything would be okay. Like, there is not a place in the technology industry that I could say I've ever worked that I could say that. So that was such a good organization. And the Nuance had the kind of like, fly high, go fast, break stuff, throw it over the wall. These companies can figure it out. They've got their own IT organizations. And in some case, that was true. But that eventually caught up with them because people couldn't deploy it and they had to depend on SpeechWorks to deploy it. It was very conceptually, it was a very simple technology to understand, which was great for sales, but it was very complex to deploy in these big networks. So eventually we bought Nuance and we took their name, which was a great moment for everyone at SpeechWorks. Far less great for the people at Nuance, which a lot of them are still friends with me and worked for me over the years. But that was a big milestone. And then around this time, you also left SpeechWorks and you started a new company. Can you tell us a little bit about, like walking away from not only a company that you started, but an industry that you created, in a market that you created? I mean, you really built a big, solid, good company that did great works. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And this is like the founders. They talk to a lot of founders that this happens to, and it's a painful process. But then they always go start something bigger, better, smarter, whatever. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had stuck around for about 2 years, and it was good to be part of that transition and see it through for a couple of years. The reason I left though is I wanted to focus much more on consumer facing applications. It became fairly clear to me. Again, this was 2005, 2006. It became clear to me that mobile phones were where this technology would become kind of mainstream from a consumer perspective first. And I was really interested in doing that. And it was just really hard to do at SpeechWorks and Nuance because we were so enterprise focused. It's really hard to
Yeah.
have kind of consumer DNA at the same time you're having a kind of enterprise path. So started Vlingo in 2006. We were the first doing kind of commercially available voice assistant programs. We actually worked with Siri before they got bought by Apple, and then they got bought by Apple, and I think they started working
Yeah.
with Nuance again then due to some
Yeah,
behind the
they
scenes
did. They
stuff.
bought a
Yeah,
bunch of speech.
yeah, yeah, indeed. So, and then we ended up being the voice interface for Nokia, RIM, and Samsung. So really interesting trajectory, and got to see the path again, learning the lessons from SpeechWorks, applying it then to this very new industry about mobile phones, and it took off in a really exciting big way.
It absolutely did. I mean, I think the Apple phone came out, what, in, like, was that 2007? Am I
Yeah,
thinking
something like
about the
that. And
time
I
frame
think
right?
Siri went live in 2008 or so, I believe, 2008,
Yeah, so you were
2009.
doing this again, you were doing this before the iPhone was even invented, which the user interface on those phones was pretty freaking difficult before
Yeah.
the iPhone came out, like, to do different types of things, so, well, you're 100% right about that, it is all on mobile, isn't it? So, no doubt. Well
Yeah, and
done.
look, we were dependent on the telecom industry adopting smartphones in a big way, and it wasn't
Yeah.
clear how fast that would happen, but it happened in a good time frame that was well matched to our trajectory. So kind of
I
got the
feel like you
timing
and
right
I
for.
we had tried to have a couple of conversations with Verizon at the time about putting our real estate on their handsets, which was like, talk about a futile conversation to have with Verizon. Their real estate was so, because it wasn't Apple, it was still these, push button whatever phones or RIM. They were like, no way, that's like gold getting anything on that. Um,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, and that is kind of the role of startups, is to show the way. I remember very distinctly. I'll leave out the names. Remember very distinctly a meeting with a key executive at one of the telecom companies who basically he saw what we were doing. He said, "Look, I don't think people are going to want to talk to their phones." But, I mean, and we were like, "Well, no,
is he still there?
I don't know. I gotta look around."
Poor guy.
But
Well, we
yeah,
actually talked to a lot of people like that back then because they were living in, we were living in two different worlds. They were living in the telecom world of
yeah,
the past, and we were living in what was, basically very futuristic and doing things that were very, very cutting edge and very, very used to living in that environment. We were used to being in that environment and selling in that environment. Um, yeah, so you sold your company again. You
yep.
sold Vlingo. You sold it to Nuance.
Yes. After lots of drama, we can maybe talk about the drama later. But yeah, yes, uh, yes, there was lots of drama, and we it ended up being the best path was they bought Blingo. I was clear I was not sticking around at that point. I was pretty upfront at the
Yes.
beginning that I was not sticking around.
Did Nuance do anything with Vlingo? I don't, it's kind of like, we did all of these acquisitions and sometimes I forget where they kind of fit into the puzzle.
Yeah, look, I don't know the details, but I believe that the Lingo technology ended up being kind of a key mobile offering of Nuance going forward. So I think that
Okay.
that persisted going forward from the consumer-facing mobile applications.
Okay. I wasn't in the mobile side. That wasn't my thing at the time, I don't think. So after you did that, you started Sense, which is a completely different path. So tell us what attracted you to this path and why you just kind of diverged altogether from what was basically your core background for a lot of years.
Yeah, so it was myself and a couple others from Blingo, Chris McCauley and Ryan Hewlett. The three of us had left Blingo/Nuance, and we had kind of it's common now to realize that you can apply AI to anything. This was
Yes.
2012. That was not the common view. So we had this notion that we could take what we knew, machine learning, data, consumer-facing applications, and you could apply it to just about anything, frankly. And again, that is now the common view, as you were just talking about. Everyone does that,
Just
right?
in the last 2
But
years.
but it wasn't
Yes.
a normal way to think about things. So we looked pretty broadly about what would be an interesting place to work, a sector to work. And what are the big problems in the world? They're not talking to your phone, right? Big problems in the world are, the big chunks of the economy are education, healthcare, energy, environment. So you could apply technology to any of those things. We actually looked around at the healthcare world for a little bit. We thought maybe this whole personal, like, see your health data and help seemed like a really interesting thing to do, but man, the regulatory environment there was just
Rough. Yeah.
super rough. So we gravitated to the energy space because it was pretty. I mean, this is all very politicized around what's happening to the climate and so on. But it's pretty clear if you look at the data that the energy world has to go through a major transition over the next couple decades. This was 10 years ago, and we're deep into that now. Like energy is 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. The pathway's gotten really clear, which is um, electrify as many things as you can, so EVs, heat pumps, and so on, and then switch to low carbon energy sources, solar, wind, and so on. So we decided to insert ourselves into that, this whole notion of
Yeah.
AI, machine learning in the energy sector. And we also came at it from a consumer facing app perspective. So that led us to residential energy use. So we had just this vague notion that if we could know in detail what happens in a home, and if we could engage consumers around that, we should be able to help consumers manage energy better in their home. That then led to it. I mean, it seems like it gravitates back to what we know, which is, well, how do you know in detail what happens in the home? Well, if you view the energy coming to your home as a signal, just like speech recognition, there's an audio signal. It turns out different things in your house use power slightly differently. So if you
Hmm.
measure the power in a super detailed way, you can tease apart the energy use just from the signals coming from the energy use. It actually ends up being just like speech recognition. It's just like a different set of signals we sort of hear. It's not hearing, but in the electrical domain, but the, the electrical signals that a microwave makes versus their car charger versus a failing power distribution transformer. So this with the right processing in the grid, we can look in both directions and help the energy grid work better and help with this energy transition. Sorry, that was a long-winded thing, but it is basically very similar to this early days of speech recognition. We needed the infrastructure to change. In the telecom world, we needed smartphones to be there. In this
Yeah.
energy world, we need better smart meters. So we're quite involved with utilities and meter makers to make better smart meters that can run software like Sense to help manage the energy transition.
So is it helping on the consumer side or on the utility side more? I mean, is it really designed to manage the large electrical grids the most?
It turns out to be both because
Okay.
we are getting software at the very edge of the network. So we're in the smart meters are on every single home. We can use technology inside the meter, software in the meter, to both see what's happening in homes and buildings and influence it through either consumer behavior or software in the meter can talk to your EV charger, can talk to your water heater and stuff like that. And we can simultaneously see the electrical grid in real time from the edge. So we can look back the other direction. And the combination of those two things helps manage the grid better. There's actually a really good analogy in the from the telecom world. Susan, I don't remember back in the day, people used to talk about smart highways where you'd put sensors in the
Yes.
highways and you'd
Yes.
use that to manage traffic better. The thing that ended up winning is once there were millions of phones running around out there that in cars that knew their location and knew their speed, that's how we have real-time traffic. So we're able to see the
Yes.
network. The network in that case is traffic networks and manage it by influencing where people drive. It's exactly analogous. Like the intelligence at the edge of the network, able to look in both directions, is where we get real value from managing a big network.
So it's an ROI for the big networks, a management tool for the big networks. They know when they're overloaded in certain areas, they can do some work to change that around. Is that kind of
Yeah,
am I grasping that right?
that's right. But intelligence at the edge can be used for lots of different things. It's better load management, as you're talking about. We even see things like fire risk. Like we can see
Okay.
things happening in the grid that are related to fire risk. So it's a very big, complicated industry. The other thing to mention is it's huge. I mean, there's an
Yeah.
estimate that $21 trillion needs to be spent on the grid over the next 30 years. So software at the edge of the grid has a big impact on how do we manage that better, not just having dumb poles and wires out there.
Have you gotten caught in any of the political nonsense that's gone on and off over the last 12 years around energy, or it hasn't had much of an impact on you guys?
No, yes, we get very caught into that. Uh, uh, we mainly work with utilities that are mainly regulated on a state by state basis, or a bit insulated
Okay,
from some of the federal policy.
that's good.
But the other thing to mention, is that it's incredibly slow. I mean, it's a very for good reason. I'm not complaining about it. There's a huge amount of infrastructure required. Uh, these things take 5 years, 10 years, 20 years to be upgraded. And again, it's a conservative industry for really good reasons. Their main priority is reliably deliver power throughout the world, and they're being hit now with more EVs, more heat pumps, more solar, more wind, more data centers. So there's a lot going on in the utility world right now, and we're plugged in pretty deeply into that.
Are you guys, is there any part of your technology that assists in identifying, hacking or, companies that countries that may wanna do harm to the power grid? I know that's a big conversation all the time. Curious about that.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the potential use cases. It's not something we've pursued just yet, but it's a real issue, real threat, and yes, you
Yeah.
could see evidence of this from the edge of the grid.
I mean, that threat exists in every enterprise. It doesn't matter if you're banking, if you're energy, if you're telecom, that exists everywhere. But definitely taking down the electrical grid, I would think is probably a top priority to people who don't have the best intentions, let's say.
But back to your previous point around, look, I think this kind of thing is a good model where we take really deep tech, so machine learning, AI. We're training models on hundreds of millions of hours of energy data. So it's really hard stuff, um, and applying it to a huge industry with real significant problems like you're just talking about. it- it- that intersection of the deep tech that we all know from the AI world and applying it to a very specific industry is where there's always big opportunities for companies.
Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating, Mike. No surprise coming from you, but absolutely fascinating. It's such a big industry and important work that you're doing right now, like seriously important work. So this is stare down the bowl. So I do have to ask you the stare down the bowl question. Can you give us an example of a time where you really had to stare down the bowl and you had to make really hard choices that you probably didn't want to make, but you made them anyways? And it can be anything from business to personal. And, at our age, and I think we're about the same age, we probably have 100 of these stories at this point, but it's always interesting. So what's your stare down the bowl moment, Mike?
Well, like it's a bit related to what we were talking about earlier. That after I had left SpeechWorks Nuance and started Vlingo, we were trying to partner with the then new Nuance, and basically they decided to try to compete with us. So we were like deep into competition, which is fine, no problem. But it's pretty well known that there was the CEO at the time was using legal battles and IP battles to try to shut down competitors. And it's pretty disturbing that it is the case that large companies can basically shut down small companies just by going after them from whether
Yeah,
they
it's true.
baseball or not. Yeah, the, yeah. So we were basically under attack through most of the time span of Lingo. And look, it's hard enough to get startups, right? You have the right technology, you have the right product, you have the right funding, you have the right team. You got to do all those things right. And to do that simultaneously with a much larger company trying to put you out of business at the same time, it is a very tough thing to do. So we had many moments where there was no other choice than to fight. I mean, you just had to. Um, and we ended up being bought by Nuance, but that was after winning the first battles. Uh, we basically won the legal battles because we were kind of baseless IP suits. So we won those battles. And by the way, when you win if you're a defendant in an IP lawsuit and you win, you don't win anything. You just don't lose.
Right,
So,
right,
eh, but that
right.
then led to
Costs
Nuance
money and
basically just had to increase the price until our board said yes. So yeah, that was certainly a very difficult time where half my time for like 3 years was spent doing that. And it's just not what someone like myself wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, I get it was a strategy at the time, but it feels very unethical to me. And honestly, we were all happy that you were winning.
I, yeah,
Like secretly on the inside, we were like, "Yay, Mike!" Yeah, that was kind of that's total bullshit thing. And hopefully, I'd like to say the new generation of techies are different, but they're not. I mean, we see it all the time with these really big companies doing this kind of stuff, and um, it's going to get a little unwieldy now, though. Like IP, where does IP lie anymore with AI? It's kind of you have to come up with something really ingenious that's never been created, in my opinion. Otherwise, you're using stuff that's already patented or you're not able to patent it. Like, how do you patent anything that you make with AI anymore? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, look, the patent system was developed for good reason, but it's hard to apply it to these kinds of spaces that are moving so fast,
Yeah,
right? And that
really,
that
really
that
hard.
then lets people take advantage of it if they choose to do so.
Well, our time is up, Mike, but it was so nice talking to you again. And, I'm looking forward to more great stuff coming from you. I don't know if you're, about at the end of doing your thing or you're going to keep going for another 20 years, but you certainly have made an important impact on the world in your
Thank you.
career. And not to mention that you're just a very, very awesome person as
Well,
well.
thank you so
So.
much, Susan. Really appreciate it. Always been
It's been
great
so
working with
nice
you. So
talking to you again. Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you again. Thank you for listening to Stare Down the Ball. If today's conversation sparked new ideas, share it with a colleague and keep the momentum going. The future belongs to leaders who act, so subscribe and join us again next week.